So why do we have standards? Okay. Well, standards are a part of our everyday life. It allows us to do almost anything. An example is for those who've ever used a cup of sugar, a cup of flour, a measurement of some kind to help you build or help you bake a loaf of bread. You're using standards. It helps repeatability. It helps products to be made. It helps products and services to be performed using those products for an end result. There's an expectation that standards help us realize. Buying a gallon of gas. Again, it's a measurement volume. It's a standard. A plug that goes into our computer. That's a standard. And, other details like wiring diagrams and such, those are all standards. So that when you plug that plug, it doesn't burn one piece of equipment up while it makes something else work. Then, of course, what about the AC plug? And then if you travel around the world, you realize the standards aren't the same as you go around the world. Imagine if that happened here at home. You'd go down to the local Starbucks and all of a sudden you couldn't plug in power to the outlet because it's a different plug. These are the things that may seem obvious, but think about film and think about how standards have helped keep a motion picture industry alive and fruitful for over 100 years. So standards equals compatibility, mostly. Even though film has been a well-standardized commodity, there have been changes in it over the years. And I used to work for a gentleman who's one of the old moguls from Hollywood at Deluxe Labs. His name was Bud Stone. I was a young guy coming in with this new video division that Fox put up on the lot there, and I turned in a PO. I needed to buy another 1-inch machine, some rack equipment and all that, and each one of those things would be about $100,000. Bud would call me up, and I'd go into his office, and he'd have a piece of film on his desk. I knew exactly what I was in for again. He had this projector back in the corner of his office that he took out of the lab that was from the 20s. And he sat there and said, okay, I just got this piece of film out of the lab. I can take and put this piece of film on that projector and it'll still run. That projector is, 80 years old. Tell me that this machine is going to last that long. And of course I couldn't tell him that. So he was accepting the video thing, but he wasn't necessarily a big fan of it because of the legacy of film and the fact that there was, even today, archival, you still want to take and turn to film at some point to protect your assets because it'll store. You say, well, digital stores well, right? Digital, ones and zeros do store well. But I've got some WordPerfect disks at home on floppy disk drives that I can't use anymore. Okay? They're 10, 12 years old. That's how long the digital format lasts. It's only as good as the format that it's on, and it's only good as the software to drive it. And that's a big issue. So, I don't know how many of you have even seen a piece of film, okay, or know what's on it. Here's a blow-up of that optical track. Over here, we have SDDS soundtrack. Up in between the sprocket holes, you see the Dolby digital sign up there. Oh, that's Dolby Digital. Here's the legacy optical sound and the time code to drive DTS. Again, well-planned. Standards mean that all of these issues are formatted, duplicated, so that if you make 5,000 prints and it goes out to 5,000 theaters, it'll work. Now, we have, yet today, a whole new generation of equipment. And by the way, the legacy of film went from hand crank projectors to electric motors. Big innovation. And of course, in the modern film projection booth, that's kind of what it looks like today. As I said, film had evolved. In the shape of the sprocket hole, in the picture position, all of these are different standards that SMPTE has worked over the years to help standardize. Meaning that you use the same piece of film base, but if you're shooting anamorphic, you know exactly what kind of lens to place on the projector or the duplicator or any of the equipment in the chain to make that work. It comes in the form of best practices, recommended practices, and standards. Not to dwell on this too much, but again, picture area within the film frame. Okay. So every piece of film will not project exactly the same, but you know how to make it work though. Now we have digital. For challenges, you need software. There's increased image formats. And there's multiple variations within each format. Now we saw that with film too, right? But we have even more so with digital, such as color gamut, log and linear files. It's not that on the average, you can always get a picture out of a digital file, mostly. But is it the right picture? Is it the right rendering of that particular format of digital? This is the problem that we all face right now, and this is why we need to rely on the standards to make sure that we can be successful in moving products through post-production. I'm going to put encryption and compression on here too. Not that we would apply too much of this in the mastering process except to maybe lock content down. But compression is something that is going to be used periodically through post-production because you need to get that copy of a scene back to a director who's probably sitting at a Starbucks in London someplace, okay, to be able to see that. And metadata. Metadata starts to help the digital workflow work better. How many of you know what metadata is? Okay. It's data about the data. So it helps define, here's my file, and here's what's contained in the file. Maybe information about how it was edited. Maybe what the color space that it's in. All the things that are necessary to make a better success out of using that file without hunting and pecking and trying to figure out things in a more difficult way. So metadata is defined by SMPTE in a lot of different parameters here. And it's all, metadata can even carry the EDL, which is kind of nice, but do you always need it? So therefore, metadata isn't always consistent going through the process. Again, standards come into play to help us even the field out so that you go from one facility to the next. You can always make sure that your production stays intact. So what does all this mean? Okay, so instead of film, we now have digital. Now, standards for digital cinema have been a long process. An organization called DCI, or Digital Cinema Initiatives, was formed by the studios to define the parameters of digital cinema and what they would really like to see. SMPTE stepped in and created standards to support that. Regardless of some of the standards that are in place today, there are still differences from movie to movie. And also the fact that if you go from a DCI, conformed format movie to alternative content, it's an open area. So DCI doesn't apply to alternative content. further standards need to be created to ensure that when those files are played back on this equipment, that this projector knows exactly what it's supposed to do to play back that file. And it's not just playing back frame rate and getting a picture out. It's aspect ratio, it's color temperature, it's color gamut, and all the parameters that have gone into that content. These standards are still evolving. Now I'm going to take a big jump, since this is a really wide-ranging subject. I'm going to take a jump into the home. So home entertainment is the next evolution, or it's the next place that content goes, okay, is into the home. Not everyone has something like this. Mine is more of a bookshelf with a small TV on it. But so what we've seen over the years happen in the home started out a long time ago. Color TV was announced, and what a wonderful thing it was going to be. What a wonderful thing it has been. NTSC was the dominant standard over the years. We had actually two. We had 525 and 625 frame rates, were commonly called NTSC and PAL. There was CCAM in places in Europe, but primarily NTSC and PAL were the dominant standards. So we had two. So keep that in mind, we had two. And we didn't like that because they were different. The TVs back then were contained in the cabinet. And I think a lot of times the cabinet took priority over the quality of the picture inside, because it had to go along with the coffee table and the end tables in the living room. But and these sets lasted for a good long time. So I would say that TVs fit into the living room. Later driven by broadcasters adopting color, meaning that we had always new things coming out, new improvements in picture, even improvements in sound. But the issues were at that time inconsistency. Every time you go to a different channel, there could be a different color reference or a different volume level. Does that sound familiar still? And there was a lack of universal quality monitoring in the industry, except by the FCC, just to make sure you stayed within the standard. But there was still inconsistencies between quality from channel to channel. Added to this environment later on, we got VHS. It wasn't just broadcast television. We can now bring movies. And a new way to sell that content into the home. It was easy to use, all except for the clock. Remember? How many of you had the clock flashing 12 all the time, right? And it's the first time that you could actually do recorded content off the air. And it kind of introduced the concept of time shifting. The quality, it was good enough. You know, what would you compare it to? But of course we wanted more. And we wanted better quality. Tape broke, tape wore out. So even if you were recording your favorite television show every week and would build up that tape and you would reuse it because that's what you were told you could do, sometimes it would break and then your world would be crushed. So there was a number of things that we had to fix. And the quality issue was an interesting one back then. Although everyone talked about better quality, but even if you had a better VHS machine, with the devices in the home actually displaying the picture, CRT using, how many of you know what a vacuum tube is? Okay, thank you. But you know, with that type of circuitry, with the standard def format only represented there, and composite video. Okay? Was there anything better that could be done? And probably not. So, what did we think we were going to do? how are we going to fix this? Well, we're going to make everything HD. And this actually started back, I remember seeing HD demonstrations back in the mid to late 80s. So it was interesting for broadcasters and for us in post-production because we realized that if we did this right, we could break this overcomplication that we had of there being two standards, two different frame rates, NTSC and PAL, 525 and 625. What a great thing it would be to make one master that delivered the same content around the world. One format. All we had to do. Okay. So we went to work. However, this is kind of what we have today. So that TV that you buy in your favorite big box store has to decode and look at and render out everything that you see here on the screen. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to do that in post. We have gotten actually over a lot of work, the ability to make one gold master for everything and then now do electronic conversions to satisfy all these things. A lot of these formats here are up there because we have more than just movies that are being pumped into our home. We have over-the-top content. We have YouTube. We have home photographs. We have a number of things that we never used to play on the old CRT sets. Now, the average display has to do so much more. So the complexity starts to come into play. Luckily, content comes into a display. The display does a really good job right now of saying, oh, okay, I know what to do, and it might flash there for a couple seconds, but it'll come up with a picture and everything will be fine. What about aspect ratio? What about color gamut? What about white point? What does dynamic mode mean? What does warm mode mean? What does cool mode mean? Movies, sports, photographs, all of these are in addition to this. And you know what? They're all there for a very specific reason. To optimize a look for the right type of content at the right time. The devices are actually capable of optimizing each type of environment. But how many times do you pick up the remote control and actually optimize it to be able to watch something? Now, I'm one of some of you here in this audience and a lot of people who work in this town who agonize over every frame that goes into a movie. Or the Star Wars trilogy, there's a lot of hours spent making sure that a guy like George Lucas was completely happy with that result. And if he wasn't, we'd go back and fix it and bring it back until he was happy. One instance, this is back when I restored the trilogy for the DVD set. They were using a plasma display up at the ranch. And you know how the Star Wars movies start out? They have that the story that's told in the wedge that kind of drifts off into space. You're left with this pristine starfield. And then the starfield fades, or the story fades out, and then the camera either pans up to a ship or down to a planet. Everything was going great. The camera starts to pan, and all of a sudden all the stars went away. George goes, hey, hold on, where's my stars? It was the display that was being used that had video processing turned on. And it's amazing how much stars in his space scene look like negative dirt. And with it moving, certainly it's dirt because it's random and it changes location. So therefore, turning processing off, playing the scene back, everything was cool. I was sweating bullets, at that point in time. But anyway, same thing can happen in the home. The devices that we're buying to go into the home today are extremely sophisticated. They'll look at the content and try to make some decisions as far as what mode is best for the content. You can shut these functions off, but how many of you ever do that? I know I probably don't enough. So, today's home environment, instead of having that TV with a VHS player, we've got content coming from a lot of different places, being rendered out on a lot of different devices. There's an audio and a video experience that we've agonized over to make right to tell the story in the form of that movie. So it becomes a lot more problematic when some of the devices up here which are rendering the content out to begin with have audio and video controls. Change brightness, contrast, color, tint. You can reformat it. A sophisticated AVR today can do the same thing before it even gets to the display. System approach that sometimes works well, sometimes it doesn't. How does this impact the time and effort of making good content and making it happen correctly, either in the theater or in the home? Because it happens both places today. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that THX is working on right now. As we talked about the use of metadata and the importance of it, even with 3D, a few things are very, very important. The fact that we have this over-complex system in the home. Right? Remember this one? Okay, so audio product brings up all types of options for the user to use. Why? Because they're all there to optimize certain types of content. This is actually a scaled down list of the various forms of DSP that can be implemented, whether you're a Dolby or DTS track. Pretty extensive. Actually, this is more like 60 different ones, but we scaled this down to fit on the screen. And again, I think consumers are overwhelmed. The 12-year-old playing games is the expert in the home, and I don't think they have the inherent interest of necessarily making sure a Blu-ray movie comes out to the best quality. So what does this wind up as? Is an unsatisfying user experience. People say, okay, it is what it is. Picture's sharp. I'll just leave it that way. I don't want to take and touch anything. I don't want to mess things up. There's a lot of features in products today that aren't being used simply because of this. We believe that we have a solution for that. What we're doing is we're enabling content to carry metadata on it. You go out and buy the newest Star Wars Blu-ray box set. Okay? Each of those movies have metadata on there. On this year, you can buy a Blu-ray player and a picture display with our program in it. My logo on it, the Media Director logo. And that TV will automatically go into the perfect mode to watch that movie. In the future, games, photographs, music, broadcast, everything else will be covered with this as well. Other things that we're doing for the home is that we've been in post-production and we've been doing projects from concept all the way to distribution to delivery to the home for a long time now. And we know exactly what takes place in all the complexities and all the things that are carried out to get a movie put through. We want that great experience to come through just like you see in the theater. So we have also THX certified displays now. Why do we do this? Because no one else was, number one. And to make sure things like light uniformity, that the screen is actually lit up uniformly across the screen. It's amazing how many times that actually doesn't work. If there's picture processing to be done, how well is the picture processed? Does it do harm or does it do advantages to the picture? We test for those things. In fact, we actually have over 300 test categories, and that's always expanding out, that we test each display for. And today you can get a LG or a Panasonic or JVC or Sharp display with a THX logo on there that have passed all of our parameters. Spoke about uniformity. Here's one display as it came in, and after we worked with them, this is what we came up with. This is a vast improvement in picture quality, just this by itself. We also throw in something very unique, THX viewing modes. I just came back from IBC, and we also certified a JVC projector. That happens to be one of the models used in post-production quite a bit. And the post house came up to me and said, you know what, we just bought this other brand of projector, and we spent a lot of money having calibrators come by and make it look right. Second room we built used your JVC projector. And we put it into that mode, and it worked. So the same fundamentals we take and put into products that go into the home as well. And wouldn't it be great if you had the opportunity of seeing the same picture that a director saw when they actually say, that's my work of art. That's my emotional impact. That's my colors, and that's my contrast. So 3D world, yeah, we get into that too. How does that change our testing? We've got to double up everything. Now we have left eye, right eye to look at. We need to make sure things like ghosting and all the other disturbances that you hear a lot about, we test for. Make sure they don't happen. Again, these are things that unless somebody is out there keeping a constant eye on progressing the technology and raising the bar every time it can be done, and then branding it for that, you really don't know what you're doing unless you actually perform a lot of these tests yourself. We're trying to make the purchase decisions easier for the consumer. A lot of the same work that we're doing here pulls back into post-production. And yes, we also certify professional monitors that go into post as well.